Andrew, we've seen in the news this week that the Greek public has been protesting about the austerity measures that have been imposed on them and the Greek Parliament has agreed to. What are austerity measures and why are they needed?
Well, let's start with the first question, why were they needed? Well, Greece has borrowed a lot of money from all around the world, and they've basically run out of the ability to borrow because now it doesn't look as if they can afford to pay it all back. So the lenders have become pretty antsy and said, well, look, we need our money back. The Greeks can't easily refinance that money, or as they go to the market to refinance, they're finding that the interest rates are sky high. So basically, they're spending one hell of a lot of their budget, their tax revenue, servicing their debt now. IMF and the other Euro countries are saying, well, you're going to have to cut your cloth pretty severely in order to get yourself back in order. What's now happening is that the Greek government is saying, well, how do we start to cut our cloth? And the state sector has been shrunk, not only in terms of numbers, and they're still doing that. They've also cut the pay of civil servants by 5 to 10%. They're also being required to sell state assets.
Well, that sounds very similar to what the New Zealand government is proposing.
It's an interesting sort of parallel to what's happening in New Zealand, where we're selling state assets. Well, the government's about to try and sell state assets, and of course they're looking to restructure, I think they call it, the civil service here, the state sector. They're being fairly coy as to whether that's a straight reduction in civil service numbers, but essentially that'll be part of the outcome. So we're getting a dose of that sort of austerity, and the question then becomes, well, how close is that parallel? Well, we ain't seen anything like the Greek austerity here. But we do have a fairly substantial budget deficit, which means we're having to borrow a lot of money offshore. So the government is very concerned to get that budget deficit down and keep our debt levels relatively low by international standards.
So is this the New Zealand government actually being proactive and cutting their cloth before the rest of the world or the people who lend us money actually ask them to?
Yes, there's certainly an element of that. There's no inkling yet of the people that are lending us money getting concerned about us yet. And the more they see us taking proactive steps to reduce our spending and get our government budget deficit under control, the more relaxed they'll be about continuing to lend to us at reasonable rates of interest.
Are austerity measures the only solution, or is there an alternative?
Well, Paul Krugman, the famous American economist, has argued that, well, yes, we've got large government debt and big deficits here. You can either go into an austerity program to try and get that under control, but one of the consequences of that is you won't get much growth. In fact, you may in fact shrink these economies, in which case a lot of those ratios look worse in the short term. The hope is that you'll come out the other side having got your government spending under control, etc., and you'll get growth and it'll all be hunky-dory in sort of 5 years' time, but you'll have been through purgatory in the meantime. The alternative, and this is his sort of, I'm summarising it very simplistically, is that, don't worry about your deficits for the time being or your debt. Just concentrate on getting your economy to grow, because growth will solve these problems ultimately. The risk there is that, you can try doing that for 4 or 5 years, but if you don't get the growth, what you've done is run up a lot more debt, and your fiscal deficits are even bigger than they were for a start, and you've got one hell of a problem at that point. Now, America is actually trying the Krugman recipe in very simple terms, and it does appear that they're getting the growth. Sure, their deficit is still pretty big and they've got plenty of debt, but they may just pull it off.